Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael M. Hotep. It is Monday, April 19th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. Well, we know today was closing arguments in the Derek Chauvin trial in the murder of George Floyd. So we heard closing arguments today from both the prosecution as well as the defense. And we know that the defense took a long time for their closing arguments. That's an example when you know that you're going to lose. And defense attorney Eric Nelson was throwing up all types of Hail Marys, trying to get a mistrial and trying to blame it on protests and blame it on Representative Maxine Waters and coming up with every excuse to try to hold everybody else accountable except his client. So we'll cover the highlights of, and I guess a few of the lowlights of what took place today. And you know, all I can say is I'm glad the trial is coming to a close. At the beginning of the trial, I was skeptical about Derek Chauvin being convicted. I'm more confident and more hopeful, but they're still a little cautious now. But the prosecution did a fantastic job. This is probably listening to legal experts and legal analysts. They say this case right here has the most evidence against a police officer. You even had a number of police officers testifying against Derek Chauvin as well. So we'll see what happens. But then also, April 13th was the anniversary of what's known as the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana. Okay, the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana, April 13th, 1873. And around April 13th, we didn't get a chance to talk about it. It was covering what was going on with the Derek Chauvin trial so much. But we're going to talk about that some today, okay? And this took place during Reconstruction. And it's a very, very important piece of history. All right, now on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, the 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, the 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com to sign up for our email newsletter also. My new class starts up on Saturday, April 24th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is going to be a 9-week, 18-hour online course. We'll do it thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online course there. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. All right, so let's jump into this before the break here. So today we heard closing arguments after 45 witnesses and 14 days of testimony. The prosecution and the defense in the Derek Chauvin trial and the murder of George Floyd gave closing arguments. Let's go to clip one, Shakita. All right, it'll start up in just a second here. Derek Chauvin's fate will soon be in the hands of, well, it's in the hands of a jury now, and we don't know how long deliberation is going to take place. Do we have it queued up? Just press play. Prosecutor Steve Schleicher showed video and photos from the scene as he made his presentation, urging the jury to believe your eyes in an echo of the prosecution's opening statement from 3 weeks ago. Let's go. Let's run.
During closing arguments today, in excruciating detail, prosecutors reminded jurors of Floyd pinned under Chauvin's knee for 9 minutes and 29 seconds.
George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020 were, "Please, I can't breathe." He said those words to the defendant. He asked for help with his very last breath.
Floyd's death sparked worldwide protests and reignited a social justice movement.
I'd like to thank the community and also like to thank everybody around the world for standing together with us in solidarity.
But in the courtroom today, prosecutors tried to keep the jury's focus on the actions of one police officer, not the whole system.
This is not an anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution.
Chauvin is facing 3 charges: second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. If convicted, the most serious charge carries up to 40 years in prison. But legal experts say a first-time offender like Chauvin would likely be sentenced to much less. After the prosecution finished its nearly 2-hour presentation,
Mr. Nelson, you may close for the day.
Chauvin took off his mask as his attorney presented his closing arguments.
A reasonable police officer, a reasonable officer, a reasonable police officer.
Using those phrases at least 118 times, playing many clips from the officer's body cameras, and arguing that they showed a clearer picture of the moments leading up to Floyd's death.
The 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds.
Attorney Eric Nelson argued that Floyd was actively resisting as a crowd gathered.
This was an authorized use of force, as unattractive as it may be. And this is reasonable doubt. These are officers doing their job in a highly stressful situation.
Late today, the prosecution gave its rebuttal, arguing that Floyd did not die because of drug use or an underlying heart condition.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
Gabe, after the jury left today, the judge also said the defense might have grounds for appeal because of what a congresswoman said. What do we know about that?
All right, pause it right there, Shakita. Pause it right there. Pause the clip right there. Cue it back up from the beginning. We're going to start over when we come back from the break. All right, we have to take a commercial break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael M. Hotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by, everybody. Stand by. How's everybody doing? Stand by. We'll be back from break in, I think, 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Everybody share this broadcasting on social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. Stand by. All right, we've got Jeff. Let's see who we've got. Jeff, we've got Mulu, Carl, TC, Mildred, Randy, Sis Ray Lay, just a few of the people watching on social media. Anita Kent in Detroit, Shirley, Ruby. All right, everybody share this broadcast. We'll be back from break in 2 minutes. All right, stand by. Phone number is 313-778-7600. Here's information for my online course that starts up Saturday, April 24th. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Get back from break in 1 minute. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Monday, April 19th, 2021, and we're live. Hope everybody's doing well. All right, so right before the break, we were talking about closing arguments in the Derek Chauvin trial and the murder of George Floyd. So I want to go back to this clip here from NBC Nightly News. We know that there were 45 witnesses. We heard a total of 45 witnesses, 38 from the prosecution. And also prosecutor Jerry Blackwell did the rebuttal to the argument, to the closing arguments from the defense. He did an excellent job once again, prosecutor Jerry Blackwell. Now, prosecutor Steve Schleicher showed video and photos from the scene as he made his presentation, urging the jury to believe your eyes, in an echo of the prosecution's opening statement from 3 weeks ago. He said, you can believe your eyes. It's what you felt in your gut. It's what you know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder. This wasn't policing. This was murder. Now, I think that's going to be a slogan that you see on T-shirts and maybe bumper stickers. Okay. This is what he said. He said this wasn't policing. This was murder. He's absolutely correct. The defendant is guilty of all 3 counts, all of them, and there is no excuse. Okay. Now, prosecutor Schleicher emphasized that Derek Chauvin is on trial, not police as an institution. He said, make no mistake, this is not a prosecution of the police. It is a prosecution of the defendant. Okay. Now, the prosecution argued that Derek Chauvin abandoned his training when he kneeled on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Okay, Shakita, let's go back to clip 1, please.
"45 witnesses and 14 days of testimony. Tonight, Derek Chauvin's fate is in the hands of the jury.
You can believe your eyes.
During closing arguments today, in excruciating detail, prosecutors reminded jurors of Floyd pinned under Chauvin's knee for 9 minutes and 29 seconds.
George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020 were, please, I can't breathe. He said those words to the defendant. He asked for help with his very last breath.
Floyd's death sparked worldwide protests and reignited a social justice movement.
I'd like to thank the community, and also like to thank everybody around the world for standing together with us. in solidarity.
But in the courtroom today, prosecutors trying to keep the jury's focus on the actions of one police officer, not the whole system.
This is not an anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution.
Chauvin is facing 3 charges: second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. If convicted, the most serious charge carries up to 40 years in prison. But legal experts say a first-time offender like Chauvin would likely be sentenced to much less. After the prosecution finished its nearly 2-hour presentation,
Mr. Nelson, you may close for the defense.
Chauvin took off his mask as his attorney presented his closing arguments.
A reasonable police officer, a reasonable officer, a reasonable police officer.
Using those phrases at least 118 times, playing many clips from the officer's body cameras, and arguing that they showed a clearer picture of the moments leading up to Floyd's death.
9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds.
Attorney Eric Nelson argued that Floyd was actively resisting as a crowd gathered.
This was an authorized use of force, as unattractive as it may be. And this is reasonable doubt. These are officers doing their job in a highly stressful situation.
Late today, the prosecution gave its rebuttal, arguing that Floyd did not die because of drug use or an underlying heart condition.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
Gabe, after the jury left today, the judge also said the defense might have grounds for appeal because of what a congresswoman said. What do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right, Lester. Over the weekend, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California said that protesters need to get more confrontational if there was a not guilty verdict. The judge today said that disrespectful comments from elected officials were abhorrent. Meanwhile, there are more demonstrators here tonight outside of the courthouse, Lester.
Okay. All right. So that's from NBC Nightly News, April 19th, 2021. So, I think a lot of people are going to need therapy after this trial, regardless of what the verdict is. Now, I think something that's important to keep in mind is that there are 3 more trials, because each officer is going to be tried individually. At least that's the plan of the prosecution now. So there are 3 more trials of the other 3 officers coming. So, hopefully, I think the other 3 trials, I don't think they will be as emotional as this one, but we'll see. Okay. All right. So, defense attorney Eric Nelson said that Derek Chauvin used reasonable force on George Floyd because George Floyd was resisting arrest. He said the 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. The defense reminded the jury that the burden of proof is on the prosecution and accused the state of having failed to meet the burden beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, now I think the state met their burden. Okay, the prosecution put on a fantastic argument. Okay, they put on a fantastic legal argument. Now, the defense reminded the jury that the burden of proof is on the prosecution. Defense attorney Eric Nelson began presenting the defense's case. Chauvin removed his mask at the defense table. Now, normally he sat there with his mask on. I think he wanted people to see him as a human being. So he removed his mask because during the previous days he kept his mask on. Okay, except when he talked and said that he was going to plead the fifth and not take the witness stand to defend himself. Okay. Now, Minneapolis is on edge ahead of the verdict. The White House has been monitoring the developments in the trial, and President Joe Biden is expected to deliver remarks after the jury renders its decision. Okay, I wanted to go to clip number 2 here, and let's see. Yeah, we're going to go to clip 2. This is from the readout, Joanne Reed, prosecutor on Derek Chauvin. This wasn't policing, this was murder. Okay, let's go to clip 2.
Readout tonight with the country bracing for a decision from 12 jurors chosen to decide the fate of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Protests have already begun tonight, something we could see every night until a verdict is reached over the killing of George Floyd. And while we don't know how long it will take for the now sequestered jury to reach that verdict, the decision by these 12 people will almost certainly reverberate well beyond the confines of that courtroom. The question at stake is simple. Will yet another death of a Black person at the hands of police be overlooked? Will George Floyd's name be placed alongside Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Philando Castillo, and so many others in which the officers involved in those killings were not held accountable? And of course, that doesn't even cover the countless others who never even had their day in court to try to hold their killers accountable. Or will a family in this country finally see some justice against someone who took an oath to protect and serve? Will there be some accountability for what can only be described as a continued and growing epidemic of police violence in America? Before the jury began deliberating, the prosecution and the defense made their closing arguments. The prosecution told jurors they just need to believe their own eyes and their common sense.
A knee to the neck, a knee to the back, twisting his fingers, holding his legs for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the defendant's weight on him. The lungs in his chest, unable to expand because there wasn't enough room to breathe. George Floyd tried. This wasn't policing. This was murder.
And the prosecution also described Chauvin ignoring Floyd's final cries for help. And now Chauvin may have been affected by the crowd, but not the way that the defense had portrayed them.
Defendant facing down that crowd. They were pointing cameras at him, recording him, telling him what to do, challenging his authority.
Oh, we
His
can help with
ego,
that. Okay.
his pride, the kind of pride that makes you do better, be better. The kind of ego-based pride. The defendant was not going to be told what to do. He was not going to let these bystanders tell him what to do. He was going to do what he wanted, how he wanted, for as long as he wanted.
Remember, at one point, eyewitness Charles McMillan told Floyd, "You can't win." And Floyd cried out, "I'm not trying to win." But as the prosecution pointed out, Chauvin was trying to win. For its part, the defense rested its closing argument, telling the jury that they didn't actually see what was clear on all of those videos. And while police officers can make mistakes, the blame for George Floyd's death, at least for the defense, rests with George Floyd himself.
You have to be convinced that the defendant's actions caused the death of Mr. Floyd. Actions that happened before Mr. Floyd was arrested that have nothing to do with Officer Chauvin's activities are not the natural consequences of the defendant's actions. The drug ingestion, right? The bad heart, the diseased heart, the hypertension. All of these things existed before Mr. Chauvin arrived.
In its rebuttal, the prosecution made this final statement to the jury.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. You heard that testimony. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
I wrote down.
Okay. All right. So that's from the readout, MSNBC, Joanne Reed. Let me see. There was one other clip I was trying to find here, but there's something wrong with it. Okay, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a quick question or comment. All right, so one of the things that we saw here in the trial is them talk about George Floyd's size, as if his size was somehow reason to use deadly force. Okay, just because he was 6'3" and he was strong. And see, this then ties into stereotypes of African American men, and it ties into this fear of African American men, oftentimes, that some white people have, basically dealing with stereotypes, and then you're trying to bring in drug usage and excited delirium, and all these other things, and play on these stereotypes and scare white people. Okay, I'm going to send you this link, Shakita, to the clip that wasn't playing. All right, so check that out and cue that up, please. If we look, I'm looking here at so I've gone through and looked at the live updates on the Washington Post, and I'm looking at the ones from NBC News right now. Prosecution, quote, being large and being on something is not a justification for the use of force. Being large and being on something is not justification for the use of force. All right. And prosecutor Steve Schleicher told jurors Monday that George Floyd being large and being on something, being on some type of drugs or what have you, is not justification for use of force, for the use of force that Derek Chauvin used against him during his fatal interaction with police. Prosecutor Schleicher said Derek Chauvin, quote, explained the basis of his actions, end quote, to one of the bystanders, 61-year-old Charles McMillan. In police video, Derek Chauvin could be heard saying in footage to McMillan that George Floyd was a quote unquote sizable guy who was, quote, probably on something. A sizable guy who was probably on something. So, because I asked this question last week. I said, so is this like how Derek Chauvin treats somebody who's taller than him? Chauvin's 5'9", George Floyd was 6'3". George Floyd wasn't 8'3". Okay, he wasn't King Kong. He wasn't 8'3", he was 6'3". But so is this how Derek Chauvin usually treats people who are taller and stronger than him, that don't do, maybe he feels don't do exactly what he tells them to do? Is this how they treat him? Is this how he treats them? So now Schleicher, so this is what Derek Chauvin said to Charles McMillan. We saw 61-year-old Charles McMillan testify on the witness stand, break down crying. But prosecutor Schleicher said, quote, his two justifications were that George Floyd was big and that he might be on something. George Floyd was big and he might be on something. Now, Schleicher told the jurors that they heard the standards for use of force. They heard the standards for use of force during testimony, and that officers are authorized to use force, quote, to respond to a threat. And I'm going to switch over to the screen share so you can see this direct quote here. Where are we? Okay. I'm looking at the live updates from NBC News. So he said that Prosecutor Schleicher said he told the jurors that they heard the standards for use of force during testimony, and that officers are authorized to use force, quote, to respond to a threat. They're not authorized to use force to respond to a risk. They're authorized to use force to respond to a threat. Okay, to respond to a threat. All right, now the attorney said while George Floyd could have been a potential risk, his size and whether he had taken drugs alone did not make him a threat to Derek Chauvin or the other officers and was not a crime. He said, quote, when questioned, their force expert witness, use of force expert witness, when questioned, their force expert witness conceded that the combination of the two, being large and being on something, is not a justification for the use of force. He said one of the other defense witnesses, quote, he said of one of the other defense witnesses, quote, it just isn't. That's not what they get to do, end quote. Now, Prosecutor Schleicher said Derek Chauvin's explanation was not good enough and was not following use of force policy or procedure. He said he's not following the rules. Okay, now I want to go to this next clip here. This is from the prosecution. Using police badge as, quote, license to abuse the public is simply wrong, end quote. Let's go to this clip, Shakita.
Now, it is most certainly right, for example, for a police officer to take seriously this overarching mission of the police department, embracing the sanctity of life and protection of the public as the highest values. But it is equally wrong. It is equally wrong to take this badge, which is a symbol of a commitment to a higher calling to serve the people, to use this badge as a license to abuse the public, to mistreat the public, to not follow proper procedures, to not render aid when you should administer aid. That's wrong. That's not a story. That's simply wrong. And the only two sides to that would be the W and the G for that being wrong. Now, you have heard statements to the effect of Mr. Chauvin being concerned about the bystanders and about others. Well, if you're looking at the totality of the evidence, you have to bear in mind that at all relevant times here, there were 5 grown men police officers right there. And 4 right there on the scene. And then again, Officer Chang, who was there too. There's a radio to call for backup if they felt it was needed. You didn't hear any evidence about any call for backup at all. Now, there was concern here that Mr. Chauvin was concerned. And I won't say much more about body language than has already been discussed. And you'll decide for yourself whether that was the face of one who was afraid at the time. Because he had all of the power at this point. He had the bullets, guns, he had the mace that he threatened the bystanders with. He had backup, he had the badge, and he had all of it.
Okay. All right. So that was Prosecutor Blackwell you heard there in rebuttal to the defense's closing arguments. Once again, Prosecutor Jerry Blackwell did a masterful job in the rebuttal to the closing arguments. All right. So, now something interesting happened today. Then we're going to switch over to the Colfax Massacre of 1873 here in just a second. So I was looking at, I was monitoring the news sources today, and the governor of Minnesota gave a speech today and he's talking about he's calling for calm, and he's says police goal is de-escalation, non-confrontation, and potential post-verdict protests. So it was the governor, Governor Waltz, as well, and Mayor Jacob Frey spoke in a joint news conference today. And St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter. They all spoke in a joint news conference today to address concerns over police response that have heightened in the past week after the state and local law enforcement clashed, sometimes violently, with protesters and members of the news media. So we know that in Brooklyn Center, protests are going on behind the killing of Dante Wright. Now, the governor said that there are no statewide, regional, or specific curfews in effect, but that leaders may implement them as necessary. The governor has been cautious in striking a balance among community members wary of police force, community members wary of police force, citizens scared from the destruction wrought during last year's protests over George Floyd's death, First Amendment protections, and the interests of the state law enforcement agencies that answer to them. Okay, now a letter sent Saturday to Governor Waltz, W-A-L-Z, on behalf of more than 24 press advocacy groups and news organizations, including the Washington Post, called on the Minnesota State Patrol to embrace the language of a temporary restraining order and halt arrests and physical assaults against reporters, because there were reporters detained and tear gas, things like this. Now, asked Monday whether police have escalated tensions with demonstrators, Governor Waltz called it, quote, a bit of a chicken and an egg, end quote. He said, I think it starts to feed on itself. He said the vast majority of protesters expressing their anger tell elected officials like him that if they don't fix the underlying factors, they will continue to face people protesting in the streets. All right, so we'll talk about this more on Tuesday's show. Okay, so I want to get to this last story here. This deals with the Colfax Massacre of 1873. Okay, in this is in Louisiana, and this ties right into Reconstruction. And, you know, Dr. John Henrik Clarke said all history is a current event. Everything that's ever happened continues to happen in some shape, form, or fashion. And what's interesting here is with all the talk of reparations going on, very few people are talking about the fact that Americans are very ignorant of history, which is true. All you have to do is look at the January, I think it was January 19th, 2021. There was a segment on CBS This Morning. We talked about it here, CBS This Morning, and it dealt with how most Americans don't know what's in the U.S. Constitution. Okay, and all this ties into history. So when we look at the Colfax Massacre of 1871, and we're going to look at a few different sources here. I'm sorry, 1873. They have information on this at the Zen Education Project, And this dealt with elections also. This dealt with voting, this dealt with elections. Okay, so the Colfax Massacre occurred in Colfax, Louisiana on Easter Sunday. That's Colfax. Okay, how many people are familiar with the Colfax Massacre of 1873 in Louisiana? So this occurred on Easter Sunday, April 13th, 1873. So Republicans had narrowly won the 1872 presidential election to retain control of the state, but Democrats contested the results. Okay, now keep in mind, this is long before the party realignment takes place. You know, very few, and this is 4 years before the Compromise of 1877. Okay, this is 4 years before the Compromise of 1877 also. Okay, so we have to keep all this in mind about what we're talking about. But when we look at this here, historian Eric Foner calls the Colfax Massacre the bloodiest single instance of racial carnage in the Reconstruction era. The bloodiest single instance of racial carnage in the Reconstruction era. The Colfax Massacre taught many lessons, including the lengths to which some opponents of Reconstruction would go to regain their accustomed white supremacist authority. Now, we can compare the Colfax Massacre to the January 6th insurrection, when you had a lot of white supremacists who were trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election and basically overthrow the government and leave a dictator in office. We could look at the lengths to which some opponents of Reconstruction would go to gain their accustomed white supremacist authority, and we could look at the lengths to which white supremacists today are trying to maintain power. Now, fearful that the white militias would attempt to take over local parish governments, fearful that the white militias would attempt to take over local parish governments, Republican office holders occupied the Colfax courthouse. Okay, what their militias involved in the insurrection? And then if we look at the see, all history is a current event. Everything that's ever happened continues to happen in some shape, form, or fashion. There was a story. Some of you all saw the story on 60 Minutes, an interview with the Oath, one of the leaders of the Oath Keepers. Okay, Jim Arroyo, Rooyo. Well, there's a story from rawstory.com that I posted today on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Check out this story. 60 Minutes interview reveals Oath Keepers militia are being trained by police. How many people saw this? 60 Minutes interview reveals Oath Keepers militia are being trained by police. In an interview with 60 Minutes Sunday evening, Oath Keepers leader Jim Arroyo revealed that active duty law enforcement is part of their movement. He revealed that active duty law enforcement is part of their movement in helping with militia training. Okay, this was revealed 60 Minutes. Now, this isn't conspiracy theory stuff. This is facts and evidence. He did this interview with 60 Minutes and he revealed this. He said, quote, "Our guys are very experienced. We have active duty law enforcement in our organization that are helping to train us. We can blend in with our law enforcement," end quote, he said. Read this article here from rawstory.com. 60 Minutes interview reveals Oath Keepers militia are being trained by police. This is from written by Sarah K. Burris, April 18th, 2021. All right. We're going to go, let's see here. Okay, so let's go back to Colfax Massacre. Now we're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Those watching on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael M. Hotep, IMHOTEP. Keep watching. We're going to keep broadcasting for a few more minutes to finish up this story. Remember, right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace. Okay, let's continue here. All right. Also, if you'd like this type of information, you can support the African History Network. $ the AHN Show through Cash App. $ the AHN Show through Cash App. And also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. PayPal.me/the AHN Show. All right. So when we look at back to the Colfax Massacre, so fearful that white militias would attempt to take over local parish governments, Republican office holders occupied the Colfax courthouse. Now, an article from blackpast.org gives a description of what happened. More than 300 armed white men, including members of the white supremacist organizations, such as the Knights of the White Camellia and the Ku Klux Klan, because the Klan wasn't the only domestic terrorist organization. You had the Red Shirts and the Knights of the White Camellia and different organizations like this. These organizations attacked the courthouse. When the militia maneuvered a cannon to fire on the courthouse, some of the 60 black defenders fled while others surrendered. When the leader of the attackers, James Hadnot, was accidentally shot by one of his own men, the white militia responded by shooting the black prisoners. Okay? When James Hadnot was accidentally shot by one of his own men, the white militia responded by shooting the black prisoners. Those who were wounded in the earlier battle, particularly black militia members, were singled out for execution. The indiscriminate killing spread to African Americans who had not been at the courthouse and continued into the night. Although federal charges were brought against several white insurgents, the Supreme Court later ruled in the United States versus Cruikshank that the 14th Amendment only applied to state actions and offered no protections against acts by individual citizens. So many African Americans saw this as a betrayal because they couldn't get protection from the federal government under the 14th Amendment. So estimates are that 3 white people and an estimated 150 African Americans were killed in this Colfax Massacre. All right. Now, if we switch over quickly, and I may do a separate broadcast on this for the sake of time here. This is basically a 1-hour show, and I have a lot of work to do, so I have to get out of here. But I may do a separate broadcast just to focus on this. If we look at this article from SmithsonianMag.com, official website of the Smithsonian Institute, the 1873 Colfax Massacre crippled the Reconstruction era. The 1873 Colfax Massacre crippled the Reconstruction era. One of the worst incidents of racial violence after the Civil War set the stage for segregation. All right. Now, this is a etching of Black families gathering the dead after the Colfax Massacre. This was published in Harper's Weekly, May 10th, 1873. This etching. This was published in Harper's Weekly, May 10th, 1873. Okay, so this is during Reconstruction. This is 8 years after slavery ended. So the Reconstruction period that followed America's Civil War was one of the worst, most violent eras in American history. During that time, thousands of African Americans were killed by domestic terrorists like the Ku Klux Klan, who tried to reinforce antebellum policies of white supremacy. For many historians, one of the worst examples of the violence occurred 143 years ago today. Well, when this article came out 143 years ago. The Colfax Massacre of April 13th, 1873. Now, immediately after the end of the Civil War, different factions began fighting over power. Bitter over the Confederacy's loss, many white Southern Democrats tried their best to continue disenfranchising and restricting the rights of former slaves. At the same time, insurgent white supremacist groups terrorized African Americans throughout the South. In Louisiana, the fight over post-war government was particularly bloody, as PBS's American Experience series explores. So here you have a fight over political power. Here you have a fight over political power. And we know that politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Now, simmering resentments between Southern Democrats, most of them former slave owners, and the Republican-dominated federal government exploded in the 1872 election for Louisiana's governor. The ballot resulted in a hotly contested split between the Republican and Democratic candidates. And when President Ulysses S. Grant sent federal troops to support the Republican candidate, white Southerners rebelled and formed a heavily armed insurgent army called the White League. The White League. Now, the White League was similar to the Ku Klux Klan, and the White League was a paramilitary group that intimidated and attacked African Americans as well as white Republicans across the state. Now, what a lot of people don't know about the Ku Klux Klan is that the Klan was also lynching white Republicans as well as Jews. Okay, the Klan wasn't just attacking only African Americans. The Klan was attacking white Republicans and Jews. And then also we know that from 1882 to about 1964, we know that there were 4,743 lynchings. 1882, 1968, I should say, 4,473 lynchings that took place in the United States. If you go to NAACP.org, NAACP's national website, search for lynchings. They have a section dealing with the history of lynchings. Okay, we've talked about this before. Let's see here. Okay, they have a section dealing with the history of lynchings. And from 1882 to 1968, there were 4,743 lynchings that occurred in the U.S. Of these people that were lynched, 3,446 were African Americans. African Americans made up 72.7% of those lynched between this period of time. Now, these numbers seem large, but it is known that not all of the lynchings were ever recorded. Out of the 7,443 people lynched, okay, 1,297 were white. Okay, that's 27.3%. Many of the whites lynched were lynched for helping African Americans or being anti-lynching, and even for domestic crimes. All right, so the Klan and other white supremacist organizations, they were not just attacking African Americans; they were also attacking white Republicans, and they were lynching Jews, some Jews as well. Yes, the majority of people lynched were African Americans, but we were not the only ones being lynched. We were not the only ones being attacked. So check this out here at NAACP.org, history of lynchings. All right, now, out of fear that local Democrats might seize control of the Grant Parish regional government, which was almost evenly split between African American and white citizens, an all-black militia took control of the local courthouse in April 1873. An all-black militia took control of the local courthouse in April 1873. Soon after this happened, a mob of more than 150 white men, most of them former Confederate soldiers and members of the Ku Klux Klan and the White League, arrived and surrounded the courthouse. After firing a cannon on the militiamen inside the courthouse on April 13th, 1873, the two forces fired at each other until the African American defenders were forced to surrender. But when they surrendered, the white mob murdered many of the African American men, shooting at them and hanging some of them. Historians aren't sure how many people died at the end, but while records show that the massacre resulted in the deaths of 3 white men, it's estimated that anywhere from 60 to 150 African Americans were killed. So it's important to understand. So this is 8 years after the Civil War ends. In the Civil War, you had about 186,000 roughly African American men that served in the Civil War. These brothers come back home. They come back home with a knowledge of how to use guns. They come back home with a knowledge of military strategy. So they're defending their communities against the Klan. They're defending their communities against the White League. They're defending their communities against these white supremacists. We weren't just laying down, taking this. We were fighting back and shooting back. The same thing applies after World War I ended. Okay, I did a whole presentation dealing with how African American veterans defended their communities during the Red Summer of 1919, and how these brothers who served in World War I came back home and they had knowledge of how to use weapons. They had military strategy. They knew military strategy. So when during the Red Summer of 1919, when you had over 25 major race riots in this country, these brothers they're out with their guns defending their communities. Okay, and we're fighting back and shooting back. If you go to 1921, and we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the attack on Black Wall Street, the Greenwood district in North Tulsa. Okay, in the Tulsa Massacre, the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, June 1st, 1921. You had a lot of retired World War I veterans, African American World War I veterans that lived in North Tulsa, okay, where Black Wall Street is. All right. And when when thousands of white people came into our community, we fought back and shot back. And not only that, and Rachel Maddow talked about this on the Rachel Maddow show on April 19th. But when Dick Rowland, the boot black or the shoeshine shoeshine man, when Dick Rowland was at the sheriff's jail, there was a group of somewhere between 150 to 200 African American men who were armed, who went to the jail to back up the sheriff and protect Dick Rowland, because there's a group of about 500 white men who wanted to take Dick Rowland out and lynch him. So there's a history of us fighting back. Oftentimes when the story is told in these massacres, it's just like we just lay down and got shot. No, you got shot. No, that's not what happened. So after firing a cannon on the militiamen inside the courthouse on April 13th, the two forces fired at each other until the black defenders were forced to surrender. But when they surrendered, the white mob murdered many of the black men, shooting at them and hanging some. Now, historian Eric Foner writes in his book Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877, he says the bloodiest single instance of racial carnage in the Reconstruction era, the Colfax Massacre, taught many lessons, including the lengths to which some opponents of Reconstruction would go to regain their accustomed authority. The lengths that some would go to regain their accustomed authority. He said, quote, among blacks in Louisiana, the incident was long remembered as proof that in any large confrontation, they stood at a fatal disadvantage. Now, while the massacre made headlines across the country and 97 members of the white mob were indicted, in the end, only 9 white men were charged for violating the Enforcement Acts of 1870, 1871, sometimes known as the Ku Klux Klan Acts. You've heard me talk about the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. And the Ku Klux Klan Act was intended to guarantee the rights of freedom under the 14th and 15th Amendments. Lawyers for the victims believed that they had a better chance of bringing the ringleaders to justice in federal court, citing conspiracy convictions instead of charging them with murder, which would have been tried in the heavily Democratic state courts. So they took it to federal court. But the plan backfired. The defendants appealed. And when the case eventually came before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1876, the Supreme Court justices overturned the lower court's convictions, ruling that the enforcement acts applied only to actions by the state, not by individuals. Okay. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the enforcement acts applied only to actions by the state, not by individuals. This ruling eventually neutered the federal government's ability to prosecute hate crimes committed against African Americans. Without the threat of being tried for treason in federal court, white supremacists now only had to look for legal loopholes and corrupt officials to continue targeting their victims. This is a statement from Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. Okay, let's flip over back to this here. Okay, so this ruling essentially neutered the federal government's ability to prosecute hate crimes committed against African Americans. Without the threat of being tried for treason in federal court, white supremacists now only had to look for legal loopholes and corrupt officials to continue targeting their victims. Meanwhile, principles of segregation were beginning to work their way into law, with Plessy versus Ferguson officially codifying separate but equal just 20 years later in 1896. The Colfax Massacre was more or less ignored until the 1920s, when local officials raised a monument honoring the 3 white men who died in the attack on the courthouse, which called the battle a riot. It wasn't a riot. These white men attacked the courthouse. More like a massacre. In 1951, officials marked the site of the massacre with a plaque, once again calling it a riot, that marked the end of carpetbag misrule in the South. The plaque still stands to this day. And here's what the plaque says: Colfax riot. On this site occurred the Colfax riot, in which 3 white men and 150 Negroes were slain. This event on April 13th, 1873 marked the end of the carpetbag misrule in the South. Okay. So this deals with the history of the Colfax Massacre of 1873. Okay. The Colfax Massacre of 1873 in Louisiana. And the term carpetbagger, you'll hear this term when it applied during Reconstruction. You hear this term applied to the film The Birth of a Nation, also 1915. A carpetbagger was a person from the northern states who went into the South after the Civil War to profit from Reconstruction. These were called carpetbaggers. These were people who were not from the South, but they're going to come down to the South and profit. Okay, they were called carpetbaggers. There's a piece from history.com that deals with carpetbaggers and scallywags. Carpetbaggers and scallywags. Okay, let's look at this quickly here. Just a second here. Okay, carpetbaggers and scallywags. During and immediately after the Civil War, many Northerners headed to the southern states, driven by hopes of economic gain. a desire to work on behalf of the newly emancipated slaves, or a combination of both. Okay, driven by hopes of economic gain or working on behalf of the newly emancipated slaves. These carpetbaggers, whom many in the South viewed as opportunists looking to exploit and profit from the region's misfortunes, supported the Republican Party and would play a central role in shaping new Southern governments during Reconstruction. All right, let's see here. Let's scroll down just a second. And see, all this deals with history. All this ties into history. All right, just a second. Let me show a picture here. Dealing with carpetbaggers. Just a second. Let's pull this up. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcasting on social media platforms. Be sure to register for the online course that I'm teaching starting up Saturday, April 24th, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay. And this is a 9-week, 18-hour online course that I'm teaching. You can watch from around the world. We'll do with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. All right, so here's a famous image of a carpetbagger. Okay, carpetbagger South, and you'll see it says carpetbagger from Wisconsin to Missouri. Okay, carpetbagger South. Okay, so this is a famous depiction of a carpetbagger. Now, these carpetbaggers. Oh, I want this increase in size. Second here. Okay, so these carpetbaggers, whom many in the South viewed as opportunists looking to exploit and profit from the region's misfortunes, supported the Republican Party and would play a central role in shaping new Southern governments during Reconstruction. All right. Let's flip over here to. All right, let's flip over here to this article here. Okay, so these carpetbaggers, whom many in the South viewed as opportunists looking to exploit and profit from the region's misfortunes, supported the Republican Party and would play a central role in shaping new Southern governments during Reconstruction. In addition to carpetbaggers and freed African Americans, the majority of Republican support in the South came from white Southerners who, for various reasons, saw more of an advantage in backing the policies of Reconstruction than in opposing them. Critics refer derisively to these Southerners as scallywags. Okay, Southerners who backed the policies of Reconstruction as opposed to opposing them. These Southerners were called scallywags. All right, so check out this piece here from history.com. Carpetbaggers and scallywags, right? And this ties into the Reconstruction era also. All right, look, we have to get out of here. If you like this type of information, also you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me /TheAHNShow, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We're here 6 days a week, and this helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc., and stay on the air. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This time around, it's going to be a 9-week, 18-hour online course, because we just wrapped up teaching the class on Tuesdays, and people were saying they couldn't do Tuesdays, so we're going to do this class on Saturdays. And it really works out well for me, because Saturday is the only day I don't do radio. I'm on 6 days a week, so it's a struggle to do it Tuesdays 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. then do my radio show at 11 p.m. But when you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, you scroll down, it has information about the show. You can click here to listen to audio podcasts of the shows also. We have over 1,000 audio podcasts. We're on, I think, 9 different podcast platforms, including iHeartRadio and Blog Talk Radio. Search for the African History Network show. Click here to read articles that I've written. This is the episode of my show from March 15th, 2021, the day after the Grammys. And we talked about Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion performing WAP at the Grammys in negative corporate control hip hop. Information here about the online course. Click here to register here. It takes you to the next page. It's an 18-hour online course. Click here to enroll. Class is regularly $130, on sale $80. We do the classes live, but all the classes are recorded, so you can go back and watch it over and over again, okay? You can watch from around the world. There's also bonus content as well. We have class sessions of the previous, the classes just wrapping up. So there's bonus content that you can watch. As soon as you register, there's bonus content you can watch. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have video clips, book references, articles. We do thousands of years of history. It's about 50 articles that I reference. It's a ton of information, okay? And you can watch the class over and over again. You have access to the class long after the class ends. You can watch from around the world, watch as much as you want to, all right? Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Class starts Saturday, April 24th, 2021, okay? It's going to be 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes we may go past 2 hours a little bit, but, you know, I'll have extra time because it's on Saturday, so it'll work out well. Class starts Saturday, April 24th, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so register now. And you can start watching the bonus content right now. All right, we have to get out of here. Remember, right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace.